Hey guys, Jay Hoyt here. Before we get into today's video, we've been telling you guys at the start of every single one of the videos that the majority of you guys are not even subscribed. So make sure to go down below, hit the subscribe button, and enjoy the video. What's going on, guys? Jay Hoyt back with you. Today, welcome back to NHL 24. We're back here on Hockey Ultimate Team, and we got some good gameplay for you in the background. And I wanted to make this video because we're talking about the Edmonton Oilers. Now, if you don't know, Edmonton Oilers' situation is they've actually been doing okay recently. And what I mean by that is if we look back in, let's just say the last 5 years, right? We're not counting this year. But last year, conference semifinals loss. Year before, conference finals loss. Year before, conference quarterfinal loss. And then the playoff qualifier loss in the, I think that was the COVID year. So, and then the year before that, they didn't make the playoffs. So, we're on the right track, right? After missing the playoffs for, I mean, how many years is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11... 12 out of 13 years in a row, they got some players. They got all of their round one picks, their first overall picks, and all of their good young players that they've kept. You know, they got through that span, right? So, getting to this point, they just fired their head coach, Jay Raycroft. Now, here's what I'm wondering is, why can't this team win when they have arguably the best player to ever live that isn't named Wayne Gretzky? Now, the reason I say best player to ever live is because of how good he is on the ice. Now, obviously, you know, Wayne Gretzky played in an era where he was by far and away the best player of all time. But you look at what he did then versus what McDavid's doing now, and I know it's really hard to compare two eras of players, but to see a guy put up 150 points and to do it with how good all the players are now versus how they were then, it's pretty impressive. So how do you have players like Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Darnell Nurse on your team, and you can't seem to win? Well, I want to break that down. We got some things to talk about, and it would be kind of pretty simple to fix. Now, the first, and I would say arguably easiest thing to do, is stop changing your staff so much. I've been looking through the staff history to be like, okay, how often do they change coaches, you know, GMs, you know, whatever. And they basically change every 3 years is kind of the thing. Like they sign a 3-year contract and they go from there, right? You have 3 years, turn this team around, put us into a good situation, and then let's continue, right? That seems to be how we keep doing this. And I feel like that's the first thing, right? You have the good young coach in Jay Raycroft. He had a pretty, I guess, decent career in Bakersfield and wherever he came from there. So it looks he was a video coach with Detroit. He was an assistant coach with the San Jose Sharks for a while. Then he was an assistant coach in Edmonton. Then he was hired down in Bakersfield, their AHL team, as their head coach. And then he took over for Dave Tippett, who got fired on February 10th, 2022, and then became the head coach from that point on. So let's talk about that, right? And then he just got fired on November 12th, which was 4 days ago as I'm recording this, and you'll probably see it tomorrow, so 5 days ago. And here's the weird thing. He didn't even have 2 full years as a head coach, right? He's had 644 days, which is 1.7 years. And you didn't even give him a lot of time, right? It realistically, to try to, you know, get this team going. You know, you had 2 successful years kind of with him. You know, one, I guess, part year. And then you had 1 full year, right? His first full year was a conference finals loss. His first full year was a conference semifinals loss. And then this year he got fired after a 2-9-1 start after 13 games. Now, yes, that's not a great start by any means. But you can't just blame the coach every single time. You can't just blame the general manager every single time. You got to see what these guys are doing on the ice. So I went and took a look at the stats. Now, obviously, I know the stats don't show the full story, but I want to take a look at this. So leading the team is Leon Draisaitl, 21 points in 15 games. Solid, right? He's one of your best guys. Easy, understandable. Zach Hyman, okay, point per game. Evander Kane, point per game. Evan Bouchard, point per game. McDavid did miss 2 games, but he's still point per game. Then you have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, point per game. And then it falls off completely, right? There's your 5 or 6 guys that you have. And then after that, where's the rest of your team, right? So you have Warren Fogle, who at best is a third liner. You have Darnell Nurse, who looks to be struggling. Not necessarily struggling, but not really putting up a ton of numbers. Right? Didn't he sign like a $9.5 million deal or something? But 5 points through 15 games. I think that's 10 penalty minutes, and a -2 isn't going to do it. Matthias Ekholm, 5 points, 14 games. He's playing along with Bouchard on the second line, so not really expecting a ton out of him. So I guess I'll say that's a productive start. You have Sam Gagner, who actually recently got signed to a 1-year contract. So 7 games, but 3 points so far. I mean, not bad. Cody Ceci, who's on your top line with Darnell Nurse, playing more of a shutdown, more defensive guy, but could put up some offense. Is going to get you like 15 to 25 points a year. Not going to be a superstar defenseman by any means, but will kind of get you a little bit of points. Brett Kulak, who is a third line depth defenseman. And then here's where it gets into a big discussion where you have guys like Ryan McLeod, who's a young forward that I think plays on their fourth line. Not 100% sure, but he's only got 2 points, -4. Victor Desharnais, who I believe is their third line right defenseman, who got somehow, I was actually looking because I wasn't familiar with this guy. He got to the NHL very quickly, right? He went from basically the ECHL to the NHL within like 2 years. And it's not like he was doing super well, putting up a crazy amount of numbers. Like, it was just, he's there, and there you go. But it doesn't look like he's going to be a point guy at all, but 1 point in 13 games. Then you have Dylan Holloway, who I think was playing on their fourth line, but even then, I think he's a young player, so probably is not the best idea to have him in your lineup, especially if he's struggling that much. Maybe send him down, bring somebody else up, or try to rotate some stuff around. Derek Ryan, who is, again, a third, fourth line, rotation guy, 1 point, not doing too much. And then you have a few guys that have been called up and kind of filled in some games here that all have no points. James Hamblin, Raphael Lavoie, Matthias Janmark, who we've heard before from the Vegas days. He got hurt not too long ago, but 7 games played, 0 points. Adam Ernie, who's like a fourth liner for them. Philip Broberg, who has a pretty big part of their future, hopefully for them at least on the left defensive side. 0 points in 8 games. And then Connor Brown, a big disappointment for them, 0 points in 9 games. So, again, you have your top 6, but after that, you got nobody. And I don't know what their cap looks like or what they have for money-wise, but you got to do something here. See if you can find some cheap, and I mean very cheap, alternatives to some of these players, right? Some of these players, you might be able to swap 1 for 1, throw in a 7th round pick, an unsigned prospect that you're not a big fan of, or something. Try to get some cheap players to kind of fit around these top 6 and kind of go from there. Because right now, you got your top 6 and nobody else. But obviously, it's not just them. Let's go take a look at who's between the pipes. So the one guy I want to talk about is Jack Campbell. So Jack Campbell came off of 2 really solid years. One with the Toronto Maple Leafs where he went was like 21-9 or something like that. And then last year he was like 31-7. Like 2 absolute incredible years. And last year he signed a decent sized contract, 5 years, $5 million. But then this year he's off to a 1-4 start, 5 games played, a 4.5 goals against, and an .873 save percentage. And he got sent down to the AHL. And at the time, Stuart Skinner, who was their backup goaltender, I guess you'd call him, didn't really have great numbers either, right? And I think I mentioned earlier with the record, but 2-9-1 in the first 13 games. Now, even to this day, we're still 16 games into the year or 15 games into the year. They did win the last 2 games with their new head coach. And it looks to be like Stuart Skinner is going to be their guy, but obviously you have Campbell there too. But Stuart Skinner, not great numbers either. A 3.23 goals against, an 880 save percentage, 4-5-1 for his record. So not doing great by any means if you exclude the last 2 wins. Then he was 2-5-1. So, they're not doing great by any means. They're not there completely. And I think I mentioned it earlier, but yeah, the last 10 years for them, obviously this year they're 4-5-1 so far. Last year, conference semifinals loss. The year before that, conference final loss. 2021 was a conference quarterfinal loss. 19-20 was the playoff qualifier loss, which was the COVID year. 2018-19 didn't make playoffs. 17-18 didn't make playoffs. 16-17 conference semifinals loss. And then all the way back from 2015-16 back to 2012-2013, they did not make the playoffs. So obviously not great overall, but if you're looking at the more recent times, right, the last 4 years before this year, they made the playoffs. They are looking in the right direction, right? They're at least getting to the playoffs, but then from there, what are they doing? So they're doing mostly right and mostly there. But if McDavid goes down, if Draisaitl goes down, if Nugent Hopkins goes down, if any of those guys go down, you are screwed, right? Then you are done for. And the reason I say that is I'm looking at the projected lineup actually for tonight's game versus, I think it's the Islanders. Or maybe this is from the other night. But this is their projected lineup. And it's Nugent Hopkins, McDavid, and Gagne. And then Kane, Draisaitl, and Hyman. And then Holloway, McLeod, and Fogle. And then Lavoie, Hamden, and Ryan. So you look at that team and it's like, okay, you're spreading out McDavid and Draisaitl, which I kind of agree with. It's kind of like a Sidney Crosby event, Evgeny Malkin situation, right? Spread those guys out. You have a Nugent Hopkins who's been bouncing around, I think, every single possible forward position on this team. You have Gagne, who recently came up and signed to a contract. But you don't want Sam Gagne on your first line out of all people. Third line isn't great by any means. It's more of like a checking two-way defensive line than have any offense. And then your fourth line's just kind of like fill-in players. You look at defense, you got Nurse and Ceci, Ekholm and Bouchard, and then Kulak and Desharnais, which apparently is the same defensive pairings as before the coaching change. So, you can't really do too much because you're not really going to put Kulak or Desharnais on any of your other lines. You could switch up Nurse and Ceci and Ekholm and Bouchard, but are you really going to gain anything? I'm not sure. I don't know what they do, but if it were me, if they asked me right now, what do you think we should do? The first couple of things I would do is head over to the trade block. And I don't know what's out there as far as who's available or who would be willing to trade. But I just went over to look at the cap, cap space, and they don't have any, right? They have like $1,000 or something. Like, obviously that's not enough to do anything with. So I'm looking here. I forgot I could just do this. Well, let's make me a little bit bigger here. So this is their cap, right? So they have Connor McDavid for the next 3 years, it's going to be huge, right? If they don't turn this team around, I know people are talking about it now, but could you see him leaving after that, right? Because then Draisaitl's up the year before. You sign Hyman to a decent deal. Evander Kane's up in 3 years. You got Nugent Hopkins locked up long-term, I should say. But if you're going to ask me what to do, it's to come right down here to Warren Fogle, right? If you're looking to get some money off the books, try to get maybe a couple pieces for one, I would start with either him or a player we'll talk about here in a minute. But he would probably be the first one because You could pick almost any of these guys to try to, fit in on a third line, especially if you're struggling. But you could use a lot of that $2.75 million to get anything better, right? It doesn't even matter who it is, but find something better than him. Other than that, you're not going to trade McDavid. You're not going to trade Draisaitl. I mean, maybe if you had the right deal, you could do something with Hyman or Kane. But even then, are you able to fill in another guy to somewhat close to that caliber? Probably not. I know Nugent Hopkins been in the trade talks a lot. Maybe to do something with him, but probably not. Foegele would be my guy, that the first forward I would move. But then even down here looking at defense, right? You got Nurse locked up 9.25 for 8 years, which is absolutely insane. You got Ekholm for the next 3 years at $6 million, which is insane. You have Bouchard at he's your young future of your defensive core. I wouldn't even touch him. Cody Ceci, I mean, that's a little much for what I would want to pay for him. But you're not really going to do anything there, so just keep him there. But then this guy, Brett Kulak, 2.75 for the next 3 years for a third-line defenseman. I would never pay a player, right? Let's go look at what he's even doing. So they signed him to a 3-year contract, and so far this year, he is 15 games played, 2 points minus 7. And even going back to last year, 20 points. I mean, not terrible. But then, what is that? Is that plus minus? Yeah, positive 11, 41 penalty minutes. So even before that, you spent a crap ton, not a crap ton, but a good amount of money for a guy that up until last year has not played a full year in the NHL, and you signed him to a multi-year contract for a significant amount of money. So if it were me, that's what I would do. Try to shed the contracts of Warren Foegele, try to shed the contract of Kulak. If I had to pick one of those, I would absolutely pick Kulak, right? Anybody can fill in a third-line defensive role, give you 10 points, go positive 7, and be fine, right? You got to shred that money to get something better, because you have your top 4 defensemen with Nurse, Ekholm, Bouchard, and Ceci. After that, you got Broberg, who's there doing Broberg things, not really doing too much, and you have Desharnais, right? Get another defenseman in there other than Kulak, shred some money, him and Foegele, get someone better. That's what I would do, because at the end of the day, you're kind of wasting it with McDavid and Draisaitl and Nurse, right? These guys, I mean, 26, 28, and 28 years old. Even Nugent Hopkins is 30. You got to do something, right? You only have so much time with these players and what they're giving you that you got to build around them, right? That's the same reason why the Penguins haven't gone through a rebuild yet. It's the same reason Washington Capitals haven't gone through a rebuild yet. But that's going to do it for today's video. Let me know of your thoughts and comments. What should the Oilers do? Obviously, coaching changes, GM changes just haven't worked. So what would you do if you were in charge of the Edmonton Oilers? Leave a like if you did enjoy. Subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, guys, we'll see you in the next one.